The plan is to be wrapping up my book on cozy and wholesome design real soon. But one of the topics I wanted to talk about in the book and make today's video on is the idea of how mechanics and aesthetics are separate from one another, and why something that can be for cozy and wholesome times can also be used for violence and destruction, and oftentimes vice versa. One of many blind spots I've seen consumers and even critics and developers often have is when it comes to examining what makes cozy and wholesome games work, what makes them separate from violent or very much reflex driven design. And there's oftentimes this breakdown that people view wholesome and cozy as being inherently superior or better, or the other side, that if a game is wholesome and cozy, then it needs to be this simplistic, dumbed down affair like the older Facebook games or first generation mobile. But something that I've learned and I've seen with studying so many games and writing and talking about them for so long is that mechanics and aesthetics are separate from one another. And this is one of those topics that either you're going to immediately understand what we're talking about and you're wondering why I'm making a video on it, or you have no idea what we're really describing. When we talk about the aesthetics or the emotion of a game, this goes part and parcel with your gameplay loop, with your core gameplay systems. What am I trying to make the player feel? Am I supposed to be powerful, scared, in control, out of control? Am I supposed to be running a B&B, swimming under the sea, flying in space, flying in the earth? Who knows? And the reason why these two concepts are often conflated is that they have to be put together if you want to make an effective game. If you're describing your game as this mile-a-minute, high-octane rush of excitement, killing, combos, and kill streaks, and the entire game moves at the pace of a sloth, something's not right. And conversely, as we've seen, if you are describing your game as being cozy and wholesome, and within the first 10 minutes, 5 murders happen in brutal fashion, someone's going to be writing a very nasty email or posting about it on social media. The point for today, and again, the issue that I see a lot of developers face, is this misunderstanding of how mechanics tie into the aesthetics, in that they really don't. As a good game designer, you need to be thinking about both, but something that I've talked about a lot is that game mechanics at their most basic fundamental level do not conform or predispose to any kind of aesthetic in a game. If you want to design a cozy game about running around shooting things, you can do that. You can design a violent game about cooking, cleaning. We've seen several violent games that go around cleaning as well. But the point about this, and what I wanted to talk about in today's video, is that there are developers who feel that certain mechanics or certain game systems must or the only parts of specific genres or specific aesthetics. If you're building a cozy game, it must be like this. If you're building a violent, destructive game, it must only have this. And that is a very limited view when it comes to game design. And as we've said, one of the major aspects of any development over the past 15 years have been developers just saying, well, if everyone makes their game like this, I'm going to make my game like this, and it leads to something amazing, different, unique, and in some cases, becoming that blockbuster success of the Vampire Survivors, Balatro, Stardew Valley, and many more alike. So here's an example I want to bring up about how mechanics can go in very different places. I want to describe the pitch of two games, or two game mechanics. So the first one, this is a game where you are running around with a flamethrower, and every time you hit the button, you just see that whoosh of fire and explosion, and things melt, and you hit enemies with it, and the skin falls off in real time as the characters scream and melt into ash. Sounds like a very violent game. But what about a game that's all about you working at your local car wash, and you're using a high-pressure water gun, or maybe some kind of power washer that you can simulate to clean all manner of substances in real time and earn money that you can use to buy more power washers and more tools, and so on and so forth. Now, Power Wash Simulator is actually a really good example of what we're talking about. It is a game that controls like a first-person shooter. You're in first person and you're shooting. But we're not killing monsters, we're not fighting dirt creatures or trying to kill people before they report you. We are cleaning objects. But how many games have we played that have used similar mechanics for violent elements? How many FPSs have had flamethrowers or gas launchers, or pick any kind of spray style weapon that can be used to deliver massive damage to the enemy? The point about this is you can have mechanics that can go with very different aesthetics. Another big example of this has been the rise of cozy horror, or I think it was spoofy horror, where we take something that is very delightful and maybe add that little twinge of a little bit of spookiness to it. Or we take something that is very kind and wholesome or relaxing, and we introduce a killer that's coming up behind you. How many different horror games have we seen in the past 5 to 7 years that have done just that? Cleaning the house and it's going to be horror. Playing miniature golf and it's horror. Fishing horror. Cooking horror. At this point, I think there's as many horror job simulators as there are job simulator games on the market. And to bring us back to the original point, there is nothing inherently better or worse about making your game ridiculously over-the-top violent, or nice low-stakes, wholesome, and cozy to play. And it's important as a developer, and if you want to develop your skills as a critic, to understand that. At the end of the day, what makes a game good, bad, awesome, horrible, whatever, is whether or not the mechanics and the aesthetics are meshing together. Whether you want to make a cozy game about fighting orcs, or an ultra-violent game about, I don't know, fitting bed sheets in a hotel. And it's important, again, not to limit yourself because you think that a mechanic or a system can only go with one specific genre. Another aspect of studying design has been understanding how the DNA and foundational mechanics of lots of different genres can go in vastly different directions. If you look at the RPG genre, it has grown and evolved massively, becoming more streamlined spots and trying to be more approachable. Or we go the Path of Exile route and give you the infinitely spanning tech tree. You can do things in very different directions, and you should never be limiting yourself based on thinking that one thing is inherently better or worse. Just because Game A has a fishing mini game, or Game A has stealth, or kills, or backstabs and all that, doesn't mean that your game should do it, even if it's a part of the same genre. If you want your game to succeed, you once again need to figure out what the aesthetic or tone of it's going to be, and how those mechanics are going to convey and embellish that. If you want to make a cozy game about flying a spaceship around blasting aliens, you can do that. You just have to make sure that those elements are matching. And again, we've seen cozy and very relaxing games that do, pew pew lasers and being very cute and adorable. Just as we've seen games that have tried to emulate Mars attacks with skin melting, skeletons falling apart, and all that other gruesomeness. And if you want to be able to grow as a developer, you need to be able to separate the aesthetics or mechanics when you need to. Just because someone says that Game A is better or that all games must include this, doesn't necessarily make that true. And if you try to think that way, you're going to end up with games that just feel very derivative of one another. And oftentimes this leads to developers just kind of going around the same circle, repeating the same mechanics, the same design, and not really growing or being able to evolve what they're doing. And if you can't do that, then you're going to end up with games that, well, we've already seen before, or we've seen someone do it far better. So this will be, I guess, a somewhat quicker thought for today because it is a very simple topic once you understand it. Aesthetics and mechanics are an important foundation of building your game. These are the first questions you're going to have to ask when you're starting to think about your core gameplay loop, when you're beginning to actually design your game and get it out of your head. These are also elements that, again, you can't necessarily change 50 to 70% through. You can't get 80% or you're about to launch your game and realize, you know what? Instead of making this all violent, let's just make everything super happy and pink and polka dots everywhere. We can do that, or we can completely change our game in like an hour, right? When you're thinking about the aesthetics and your mechanics along these lines, how does one facilitate the other? And if there's something that is clashing or not fitting right, this is what we talk about when it comes to establishing your core gameplay loop. This is the time to start thinking about, does this fit my game or fit this version of it? If you are trying to build a super challenging, hardcore, the player can die at any minute experience, then having the player stop every 40 minutes and go, meditate for an hour is not really going to work. But if you're building a very relaxing game or a game that's supposed to de-stress and calm someone down, that would fit better. And you, once again, can take elements that can fit very different genres and very different aesthetics and make them fit. One game's paper doll of you, trying on cute clothes, making sure everything is color coordinates and you're fitting the fashion, can be another game's you're outfitting your super soldier with 27 barrel shotguns and 80 tons of armor, and you are making the ultimate super space ultramarine who's about to go fight all the elder gods with heavy metal blasting and blood and acid and all that going all around you. It can fit. It just takes a great design to be able to do so. And one last example before we get to the end. There is the game Fashion Police Squad that we checked out a few years ago that recontextualized the whole FPS genre of running, jumping, shooting, and killing with that of high fashion and fixing fashion faux pas. So all the weapons are kind of clothing based. You're not killing the enemies, you're just fixing their fashion mistakes, leading to a better life all around. And once again, it's a great job of using a different aesthetic for a genre that normally goes in a very different direction. So here's the question for today's video. Can you think of games that manage to use very different mechanics with their aesthetics to make it work? A hardcore, gruesomely difficult game that has some very cozy mechanics in them. Or a very cozy and relaxing game that has borrowed mechanics and systems from the most violent, over-the-top, difficult game that you've ever played. Let me know down in the comments, and with that, do all the relaxing murder or murdering relaxing that you want to do after this video. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.